Actually, the supervising scientist for the purpose of today.
Yes, that's
okay. Welcome. So I've got a few different questions on the report into the leach tank failure up at Ranger last December, and I think since the last time we had the OSS at the table, your report has been tabled, and so I'm just interested to know, the OSS, do you still have any ongoing work in relation to that matter, or have you concluded?
Keith Taylor, Acting Supervising Scientist. The investigation itself has been concluded. Our ongoing work into the future will be looking to the implementation of the recommendations from that investigation.
All right, thank you. Could you step us through the status of the report to the other agencies that are involved in examining the incident? So there's 3 that I know of, so let's just step through them. The NT Department of Mines and Energy, have they concluded or are they still working on the issue?
No, the Northern Territory Government Department of Mines and Energy is still progressing their investigation. I have seen some aspects of that investigation, but it's not yet complete.
Do you know when they intend to, I know you're not here to speak for them, but do you know when they intend to conclude their work?
I know it's a priority for them. I wouldn't like to give a date on their behalf though, sorry.
NT WorkSafe still has work?
I believe NT WorkSafe is still progressing theirs as well, yes.
All right. And the Noetic Risk Solutions, so the consultants?
The consultants commissioned by the Department of Industry that you refer to, their report and investigation has been completed.
Okay.
And the regulatory authorities are now moving to monitor the implementation of the recommendations from that report also.
Yeah. And is it your understanding that the mine is now back up to full operational capacity?
That's
They've
correct.
restarted everything. Do you know whether all 3 of those documents will be put into the public domain?
No, sorry, I don't.
Okay. Is it your view that they should be?
I don't think it's Mr. Taylor's role to proffer an opinion, but you're always very good at trying.
It's always worth asking, isn't it? What did you learn about the presence of contamination, of contaminants that actually predated the leach tank spill? Because there's a bit of material in your report that shows that actually the area was already contaminated, and some of the work actually is disambiguating the impacts of the leach tank failure from contamination that was already there. So how long has that been known about, and what's the assumed or I guess the established source of that contamination on site?
The contamination below the plant area has been well known for quite some period of time. Monitoring of that area, including as a component of the leach tank incident, has shown that plume to be very slow moving, and we'll continue to monitor that. And the source of the plume is the operational activities of the processing facility itself.
Okay. Now, the mine is slated for cessation. The mine is due to close. So January 8, 2021, which is actually not that far away, mineral processing and mining is to cease under their licence conditions. Is it your understanding that that plume will somehow need to be rehabilitated after that time?
The way that we would determine that is to look at the closure criteria which are yet to be established for surface waters. Groundwater modelling would then need to be conducted to determine if that plume would be likely to be problematic over the very long term. If that modelling showed that there were concerns regarding that plume, then we would expect that remediation would be undertaken. So I can't give you a specific answer to that as yet, but it certainly would be evaluated prior to closure.
That's still helpful though. Who will establish what those criteria will be? Is that something that the OSS will have carriage of?
We participate in that process. There is a closure criteria working group, and that has a variety of stakeholder members, including the Gunjakmi Aboriginal Corporation, the Northern Land Council, obviously the mining operator, and state and Commonwealth agencies on that. So we're pursuing a very collaborative approach to the development of those criteria.
Is that the same stakeholder set as the Mine Site Technical Committee, or are they actually quite separate groups?
No, it's considered to be a working group beneath the Mine Site Technical Committee,
right.
So it has representation of all the same stakeholders.
And that threshold question for whether or not it would require to be rehabilitated, still talking about the groundwater and that plume, who will decide? You said, no exact words were that if it's considered important to rehabilitate it, then some kind of management plan will be put into place. But who will decide how important it is to clean up the damage already done?
Certainly the mine site technical committee, as I said, including the views of the traditional owners, would be the body who would evaluate that based on the evidence at the time. We don't yet have the information to provide a specific answer to that question, but certainly it would be a view that takes into account the views of the key stakeholder group.
All right. And at what point do those criteria have to be set? As I say, 2021 is not that far away for an operation of this size, given the environment that it's operating in. When do we actually see some determinations?
We're actually reasonably close at the moment, where it is a high priority for us, as you correctly point out. So we're hoping to see some of those numbers fairly shortly. It also does involve getting agreement across a diverse stakeholder group, which potentially can take some time. So
Sure.
I wouldn't like to put a specific date on it, but it's certainly being progressed as a priority at the moment.
Okay, you think it might be this year? Is it that?
This year's disappearing very quickly,
It is,
so
isn't it?
I wouldn't like to say this year, but I'd be hoping that we would see something fairly soon next year.
All right, good. That's useful. Probably you don't have this on you, so I might just ask you to take this on notice and then I'll move on. The extent, the composition and the mobility of the plume, are you able to provide a bit of a holistic picture for us, perhaps on notice, of those three things? The extent of the plume, what's in it, what its composition is, and your understanding of its mobility and where it's going.
I can certainly do that on notice. There is also a reasonable amount of detail on those very questions in the Geoscience Australia report, which was provided as an appendix to the supervising scientist report. But we're happy to provide you a summary of that information.
Yeah, if you could, that'd be greatly helpful. So did your review process include stress testing and detailed examination of the mill and plant infrastructure? Obviously, the burst leach tank caught the company and everybody else by surprise. So has the rest of that plant been stress tested, and did you have any hand in that work?
I guess I'll answer that in two parts. The first part being that the scope of the investigation of the supervising scientist was restricted to the environmental effects or potential effects from that incident. So no, we didn't undertake any engineering assessment of the plant infrastructure. I do have an interest to ensure that work has been undertaken, and the consultants commissioned by the Department of Industry did go into a large, I guess quite a lot of detail in non-destructive testing of equipment on the site. So there was a significant program of testing undertaken, but we did not commission that. The Department of Industry did. Okay. But I guess we had an involvement in setting the scope and participating in that process.
Okay. But presumably to get your consent for restart, you'll have had to have evaluated that work and be confident that there's not going to be a repeat.
The consent for restart was provided by the Minister for Industry and the Northern Territory Minister for Mines and Energy. It wasn't provided by the Department of Environment or the Environment Minister. All
right, so you've just done the downstream assessment of the damage caused as a result of that spill. Sorry, that Senator Birmingham?
Or not caused.
Or not caused. It's a bit hard to lose thousands of tonnes of radioactive acid without some damage being done. But I wasn't trying to make...
I invite you to read the report of the supervising scientists.
It's more that the role is the impact assessment of that spill rather than providing any kind of input into prevention or the likelihood of a repeat of the incident.
That's correct. My role, or the role of the supervising scientist, is an environmental oversight and advisory body. We don't have specific engineering expertise. That would be a significant extension of our role to get into plant engineering. My concerns are the protection of the off-site environment primarily. There are other agencies who look after worker safety and look more closely at the engineering aspects on the mine site itself.
All right. I'd be happy to go into bat for an increase in resources to the OSS to allow you to extend your mandate, but maybe that's for another day. We had an interesting exchange at the last estimates around ERA's ability and capacity, particularly financial capacity, to comprehensively rehabilitate the site such that it could be reincorporated into the UNESCO World Heritage Area after 2026. And my comments, if you recall, were in the light of the fact that ERA itself had expressed, I think at an AGM, that they basically had tied the rehab potential or the capacity for rehab to the opening of Range of 3 Deeps, i.e. to an extension of mining operations on the site. So I just want to put to you directly, is it your understanding that ERA has the proven capacity to meet all the rehab costs required to bring the project area up to a standard where it can be reincorporated back into Kakadu National Park?
Yes, that is certainly the assurances we have been given by ERA subsequent to that statement you referred to in their annual report.
Okay.
I would also point out that almost regardless of ERA's financial status, the Commonwealth holds a security bond against that site, which is costed by an independent quantity surveyor annually, so that if ERA was not able to meet their commitments, which they assure us they are, the Commonwealth still has enough of ERA's money to meet those commitments on their behalf.
And is that in the form of a committed amount of money, or that actually is a bank account that's been sequestered away that actually has cash in it?
For the specific details, you would need to speak to the Department of Industry as they hold that account, but my understanding is it's a mix of cash and guarantees.
Okay. And I think, Mr McAllister, we've had this debate before as well, that they're on basically, the arrangement is such that if ERA went broke tomorrow or operations ceased tomorrow, there would be enough in that account to completely cover the rehabilitation costs.
That is correct.
That's still correct, okay. What's your understanding of Rio Tinto's role and responsibility in the matter, given that they own 68% of the company and dominate the board? Does Rio Tinto have any liability in that regard, or is it wholly vested in ERA in terms of closure costs?
I would probably have to defer to somebody for a legal opinion on that, so I would prefer not to, wade into that area.
No, I'm certainly not asking for a legal opinion. Who's liable for the clean-up costs? Is it ERA, the operator, or the parent company?
Well, certainly ERA is liable as the operating company for the closure cost, and whether there was any liability on Rio Tinto, I am not in a position to say.
Why is that? I'm not trying to entrap
I'm not
you
an
or
expert
anything.
in corporate law, I'm sorry, I'm only an environmental scientist.
Don't say only. There's no only.
I was going to make the same points in
Thank you.
but I think Mr Taylor is equally making a valid point there that ERA has a direct liability. Any indirect or extended liabilities that may or may not exist really would require some legal analysis, but you've already had assurances from Mr Taylor and Mr McAllister that there are other mechanisms in place that protect the interests of the environment in terms of the clean-up activities.
What's the total amount that has been set aside, and how much does it increment by every year within that bond account?
The bond is calculated annually based on a plan of rehabilitation that the company prepares. We review the plan for scientific veracity and for the appropriateness and effectiveness of the plan. The supervising scientist isn't in a position to review the costs. I personally don't know how much it costs to drive a truck up a hill or to run a bulldozer. So once we're satisfied that the plan represents a credible approach to closure, it's passed to the Department of Industry, who give that to an independent quantity surveyor who assesses the costs.
But how can we be so confident they've got enough money in the kitty if we don't even know what the rehab plan looks like?
I'm sorry, we review the rehab plan in detail annually.
But just a moment ago you told me you didn't even know whether they were going to need to rehabilitate contaminated groundwater. You don't know, you weren't able to tell us. I would imagine that's going to be quite a costly operation. I don't know if that's ever been done in a World Heritage Area before. How can you precisely say they have enough money left and express that confidence when something as important as whether or not we're going to rehabilitate groundwater hasn't even been determined yet?
I agree with you that the remediation of groundwater is potentially a very important aspect of the plan, though the cost of that, I think, would be significantly smaller than the cost of a lot of other aspects associated with that plan. There is contingency amounts applied to the total sum to cover uncertainties, And as with anything where you're dealing with complex environmental systems, there are always uncertainties in a number of areas. Though I'm confident that the process that we have is a good process, I think it comes up with a good result, and I have confidence that if needed, we would have sufficient funds available to conduct the rehabilitation of the site.
All right. We've run slightly over time, so I might just put this last one on notice. You mentioned there a range of contingencies, so could you provide for us on notice what is the total amount of money that has been set aside for rehabilitation to date, and how that is comprised in terms of, you said some cash, some guarantees? Could we get a breakup, please? And just on notice, because I'd...
Sure. I just want to say before, I can't promise that, because that information is with the Department of Industry, and any release of that information would be contingent upon agreement from the Department of Industry, so that isn't my information to provide. I will certainly raise that question with them on your behalf, but if they are unwilling to release that, I guess there's not much that I can do.
Understood, and that's something that I can do as well, but if you undertake through your channels, and
Absolutely.
I'll undertake through mine, so the aggregated amount and what it's composed of, cash and guarantees, and also you mentioned contingencies, so what's the range of the contingencies? Like what's the theoretical maximum and minimum that could be spent, depending on the final scope of work? Thanks very much, Chair.
Okay, thank you. We'll now break for morning tea. Thank you very much, Dr McAllister and Dr Taylor. Break until 10 to 11.